Now, the High Court in Makhanda has reserved judgment on the contempt of court application brought by bus company Intercape against the police and the Transport Department. Now, the bus operator approached the court saying that both parties failed to comply with an order compelling them to produce some kind of plan to protect their fleet, their staff and passengers against violent incidents in the Eastern Cape. In September last year, the court ordered that they should comply and execute a viable safety plan as Intercape buses have come under severe attack in the province. Let's get you more on the story. Bring in Intercape CEO Johann Ferreira, who joins us via our video link this Friday morning. Great to have you on the program so early this morning. Johann, thanks very much indeed for making time. Yeah. And before we speak about, what's taken place in the last couple of weeks, let's take a couple of steps back. Paint the picture for us, if you can, about just how severe these attacks against Intercape buses have been over the past couple of years, possibly, and what prompted you to finally approach the courts to try to get police essentially to intervene?
Look, I think it can't get worse than what we've experienced. This has started way back in 2016 already, with all the bus companies traveling through the Eastern Cape, where we've been harassed by taxi operators, dragged before the provincial regulatory entity that basically sits on permits. And also we've been reported to the traffic department for allegedly violating our permits and routes and so on. And so that carried on for years. But it wasn't just Intercape, it was all the bus companies. And then in 2019, that sort of intimidation then escalated to violence, not just against Intercape, but against all the national operators that was operating through the Eastern Cape. And I think where the road is split between Intercape and the rest of the operators is when I decided to go to the police and they decided to side with the taxis. And I think, that's why Intercape was singled out, and then it escalated to stone throwing and shootings. Shootings directed at the passengers, directed at the drivers. Banki Kaya was shot and killed in broad daylight just 50 meters outside the gate of the Intercape headquarters in Cape Town, basically in front of my office where I sit and work on a daily basis. And from there on, it just escalated. It spread to Gauteng, it spread to Cape Town. It was rife in the Eastern Cape. And we had no choice than to turn to court because, we foretold the state president, Becky Cele, and Fikile Mbalula, who was then the Minister of Transport, that this violence is going to escalate. But it fell on deaf ears. So we saw we're not going to get any sympathy or help from the government.
Right.
So we had to turn to the courts.
Sure. When you say police sided with taxi drivers, what do you mean?
Well, there's 175 cases that's been reported just by Intercape. And you can multiply that by 3 if you add the other bus companies that's also reported these incidences over years. So there's been hundreds of cases reported, specifically in the Eastern Cape, and there was not one arrest. Now, that's just not natural. That's just not normal. If you have cases that stems from murder, attempted murder, racketeering, collusion, price fixing, extortion, bribery, if you have all of that and everything in between, and you've not made one arrest, what other conclusion can you come to? And when you see there's inner workings when the taxi operators show up at the bus stop, then there's no police. And then when they are gone, then suddenly the police arrive. They're just never together. So, you have to be blind if you can't see it.
So if there's a perception then that taxi operators, at least in the Eastern Cape, are working with police, what difference do you reckon a court order will be able to make, right? Because it sounds to me like the situation on the ground has completely passed the point where anybody is following the confines of the law, at least if your story is anything to go by, your version of events. I'm just trying to follow your logic here. You'll tell me what you think.
Okay, so it's not my story, it's the reality. And it's not something that I come to tell on national television. It is, you can read the court order and you can read the judgment and you can read the cases. That's all there. The evidence has been presented and the judge made a ruling. So it's not my ruling. I had an opinion. I tested it in court, and I proved to be right. That's why the judge said, you have to compile a comprehensive safety plan to safeguard the passengers. Now, that's just to keep the passengers safe. These are just ordinary South Africans. These are just not a single, group of tourists or school group. These are family members and everyone that can't afford to fly or drive themselves around. How do they get around? How do they get to their families? So, in the absence of government and in the absence of the police, what can I do? I can turn to the courts and I can employ private security. And that's what I did. And the court said, you must compile that plan. And they compiled a very inefficient plan. And we said last year already, this time, it's inefficient. Nevertheless, it was implemented in January. Just to be proved again in front of Judge John Smith earlier this year that the plan is inadequate. So he has sent the minister back to the drawing board and he said, you have to compile a plan. Now that plan has been filed a week ago. It is just more of the same. It's vague. It's just standard operational procedures that's just being put a little bit of color on. It doesn't speak specifically escorting coaches. It doesn't speak specifically that they will be visually present at these hotspots areas, which the court order says. That's the minimum requirement. So over and above that, the minister decided the MEC decided in the Eastern Cape they're going to appeal this judgment. They're going to take it on appeal. So they've applied for leave to appeal. And government is doing everything in its power not to address this problem. But what really gets to me is that earlier in the week, we saw that there was a tax on a tourist bus that was on its way from, between Sun City and Johannesburg. And last night I read in the newspapers that, they're taking a different route and they're going to put police escorts on this route. Now, these people were shot at. Nobody was killed. They were robbed, as far as I can understand the article. But as soon as it's tourists, then suddenly the police are there and the tension is there. But when it's ordinary citizens, they've been seen as cannon fodder, and it's just not right.
Yeah, sure.
How can we feed the traveling public of the Eastern Cape to these taxi operators that's out there to kill? How can we feed them? So, as just a citizen of South Africa, a corporate citizen and a business owner, I have to sleep at night and I have to make sure that the bus arrives safe at its destination, whether it's accident-free or whether it's attack-free. And so I'm using everything in my power to make sure that these passengers are safe. There's no reason why we shouldn't be on the road. The only reason why we are being attacked is that we don't want to comply with the taxi mafia and with all their demands. So, it's clear. There's nothing sinister here. There's nothing difficult to understand. This is like very black and white, clear-cut what's happening here.
Yeah. What's absolutely concerning, of course, is that there's a large number of people who rely on buses to get around, especially at this time of the year. Hopefully a solution is forthcoming rather sooner than later. Johann Ferreira, that's the time we have this morning. Thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. Appreciate it. Johann is the CEO, of course, of bus company Intercape.